The Canon R50 V is absolutely one of the best bang for the buck cameras you can get right now. At around $650 for the body only, it's seriously incredible what Canon was able to pack into this camera for pretty much the same price, if not a little bit cheaper than the original R50. That being said, there are still some things that you should consider before you purchase this camera, and that's what we're going to cover in today's video. Some of these are good things, some of them are not so good, but all of them you should definitely know before you buy this camera. Now, like always, I'm not here to waste your time. I'm gonna jump right into this video, but if it does help you out, please consider dropping a like and subscribing to my channel. Let's get into it. Alright, first up, while this camera does share the same name as the original R50, these cameras are built for fairly different purposes. So the V in the Canon R50 V's name actually stands for video. So this is a video targeted camera, which means it doesn't have an electronic viewfinder like the Canon R50 has. Obviously, viewfinders are generally used for photography, and so Canon, to save space, to save weight, and to save money, I'm sure, decided to remove the viewfinder from the video-focused R50 V, as well as the internal flash that the R50 has. The R50 V doesn't have a flash or a viewfinder on top of the camera. So just keep that in mind. In general, the biggest differences between the R50 V and the Canon R50, the R50 V is really leaning heavily towards content creation and video, and not really as much for just general photography. Alright, number two, the Canon R50 V has an additional crop when you record 4K 60 frames per second. So if you generally record 4K 30 frames per second with this camera, if you switch over to 4K 60, it's going to crop in an additional 1.5 times. And so it won't give you as wide of an angle as you can get in 4K 30, and it's just going to give a slightly different perspective. That might be kind of annoying if you switch a lot between 4K 30 and 4K 60. So not that big of a deal, definitely not a deal breaker, but it is something to note since a lot of cameras nowadays are starting to not really have that additional crop in 4K 60. Alright, next up, being the video focused camera that the R50 V is, there are a lot more professional video features packed into this camera that most other Canon cameras don't actually have, unless you're going up to something like the R5C or a C70 or something like that. So in the R50 V, a $650 budget video camera, you get things like false color, zebras, log video, 10-bit 422 video in every mode. You get a power zoom lever, you get video tally lights, even a front record button. This camera is just packed with video features that, again, most Canon cameras aren't going to give you, and especially really any camera at this price point isn't going to give you all these video-oriented features. Alright, next up, number 5, the R50 V actually has a feature that's better for photography than the original photography-focused R50, and it actually has to do with the SD card slot. So the R50 V has a UHS 2 SD card slot, which allows for much faster cards that'll write and read a lot faster than the original R50. So this actually substantially improves the photo buffer. So if you shoot a lot of photos, especially in high burst rates, you'll notice that you can only shoot a certain amount of photos before the buffer fills up, and it kind of has to finish writing all those to your SD card, and then after that it'll allow you to keep shooting photos again. Now I'm going to put the exact numbers on screen, but the R50 has a photo buffer of like 6 or 7 raw photos. Once you hit that, you just kind of have to stop taking photos and wait for the buffer to clear, while the R50 V has a raw photo buffer of over 50 photos. So for action photos and sports photos and things like that, there actually is a huge advantage to the R50 V. Alright, next up, number 5. I feel like I said 5 last time, so this is actually number 5 this time. The Canon RF lens mount is still pretty limited. Now, I've talked about this for years at this point, and I actually made an update video when Canon finally opened up their lens system. But essentially, ever since Canon released their first camera with the RF mount, they, for some reason, didn't allow any third-party manufacturers to create lenses for the RF mount. They fully closed down their licensing for the RF system, and they basically made it so that only Canon could make lenses for their cameras. When obviously, if you're familiar with any other camera system, there are tons of third-party lenses for every other lens mount. That allows for competition, it allows for a lot more budgets and different types of lenses that just the manufacturer themselves probably wouldn't generally make. And I don't even need to explain further, it doesn't make sense to anybody why Canon would do that, other than to make themselves a ton more money. But either way, what I'm getting at is they finally kind of opened up their lens system so that third parties can make autofocus lenses now, but it is still pretty limited, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Canon still has to clear each lens individually, and it's still just a much slower, a lot more complicated process for getting third-party lenses for the RF mount. And so the reason that's a big thing to keep in mind is that obviously when you buy a camera, you're investing into the system as a whole. You're probably gonna end up buying a bunch of different lenses in the future, but Canon in general just doesn't have that big of a selection, and especially a very big selection of budget lenses. They have quite a few really high-end, you know, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 lenses, but especially for their budget market and lenses that would go with the R50V, the selection of lenses in general is just a little bit limited still for the RF mount. Alright, next up, number 6, the Canon R50 V doesn't have IBIS built in, and that kind of makes sense being one of the most budget-friendly Canon cameras, but what this does have is a couple pretty great types of electronic stabilization built into it. So there's of course no stabilization or lens stabilization if you have a lens with it, but then you can select standard stabilization, which just adds a little bit of digital stabilization and crops in a little bit on your footage. And then of course, while recording video, you can pair that with the lens stabilization to double up and get even better. But there's also a really good active stabilization mode that it's obviously not as good as IBIS or nowhere near as good as a real gimbal, but it is surprisingly good for handheld footage, and just having the option to enable that if you need to is pretty awesome. And I found myself using at least standard stabilization almost all the time. And I do even find myself turning on active stabilization every once in a while just to get the most stabilization out of this camera. Since again, not having IBIS is a little bit limiting, especially if you don't have a lens with stabilization. All right, next up, number 7. This camera is now pretty much Canon's smallest and lightest interchangeable lens camera. Now, it isn't their smallest and lightest camera officially because the Canon R100 is actually a little bit lighter, but the R100 is bigger dimensionally than the R50 V. So dimensionally, this is Canon's smallest interchangeable lens camera right now, and it definitely feels like it. I've been taking this thing on a bunch of trips with me, and I can slip this thing with multiple lenses inside my little KNF Concept bag, and even not in a camera bag, just carrying it around. It's so light. You're never gonna get tired of holding this thing. Obviously, there's different size lenses and there's bigger lenses that you can put on it that'll add some weight, but the size and weight definitely play into the fact that this is pretty much my favorite travel camera right now. Whenever I'm going somewhere and don't specifically have, you know, a certain camera that I'm reviewing or testing that I wanna bring with, I'll just throw the R50 V in there because I know I can get great photos. I know I can get great videos with it. And it's just so simple to pack with me and take pretty much anywhere. Like if you take a lens off it and just have the R50 V body, it's just this tiny little rectangle. All right, last but not least, number 8. This camera is perfect for vertical content. So you're getting, of course, that tripod thread on the side here, so you can mount this to a tripod vertically. The video itself automatically rotates in camera if you're holding horizontal or if you're holding vertically, but also the entire UI on the screen rotates as well. So it is super easy to record vertical content on this. You know, pair that with the stabilization in this camera for recording handheld vertical video. You know, obviously the flip screen, so you can flip it up like that. This is just, in general, the perfect camera for content, whether it's vertical videos like TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, or horizontal content like YouTube videos like what I'm doing here, or even more professional cinematography or video production work. The R50 V is essentially the perfect camera for any of that if you have a budget of less than $1,000. But that's it for me. I hope this video helped you out. If it did, please consider dropping a like and subscribing to my channel, and I'll see you in the next one.